All right, take a deep breath, Dog Nation, because the early signing day may be over from yesterday, but there is plenty more to come for UJ when it comes to recruiting. Hey, it's Brandon Adams, the host of DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Marco's Pizza. We're going to do our part to cover all of this with you today, who Georgia added throughout the day yesterday, what happened late last night, and what might be happening next. There are certainly a few very interesting stories to look at over the course of the next couple of weeks, next couple of months, and we'll do all of that over the next couple of days here on DawgNation Daily. In fact, it begins today as we take a closer look at Dwan Mathis and maybe a couple of those other signatures Georgia might get before this 2019 cycle comes to a close. We're glad you're with us. This is DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza. Begins right now.
From DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Marco's Pizza. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
I was really impressed with something yesterday. Yesterday, by almost any measuring stick whatsoever, was a great day for UGA recruiting. Certainly in comparison to virtually every other program in the country, Georgia got its man over and over and over again in a way in which most programs could only dream about. Yesterday would have been an opportunity for Kirby Smart to take a bow, for him to step up at the podium there at the Buttsmere Heritage Hall at the end of Georgia's practice and say, hey, y'all, look at me. Look what I just did. Look how good this signing class is. And yet, when Kirby Smart talked about his signing class yesterday, and over the course of the next couple of days, we're going to hear his thoughts on some of the players that Georgia did add. But I was really impressed with how the immediate thoughts on Kirby Smart's mind, and this is what you'd come to expect from a coach who's as driven as Smart is, the immediate thoughts on Kirby's mind were not so much, look at all the players we just brought in. It was, look at the work still left to be done. Look at the challenges that we're still facing about making our roster as good as it needs to be the top program in the SEC, which just by proxy means being the top program in the country. Kirby Smart was thinking more of the work still left to do than he was all the hay that was already in the barn. So on this program today, the first day after the early signing period began yesterday, we're going to kind of take Kirby Smart's lead a little bit, and we're going to look at what happens next. Georgia just added a slew of great players, and we'll get some intel on a lot of those guys with Jeff's intel tomorrow. But what happens now? Who are the next names we're going to start hearing a lot about as Georgia tries to build the best overall roster it can to go out and win a national championship in 2019? Well, let me start with a little bit of a clue from Kirby Smart, because when he spoke about his signing class, he mentioned one position in particular as being heavily on his mind, and I think what Kirby Smart said last night will set the tone for a lot of where we're going over the course of the next few days. Here is Kirby Smart.
It's a good day for us. We got a lot of new Bulldogs. We have a few spots left, and we still got some targets out there that we want to go after. But I think the totality of the class is it's a good balance. You can obviously see that we had to go after defensive linemen because we need defensive linemen in our program, the good big body types, and we're pleased to get that done.
So Kirby Smart says you can obviously see that we need defensive linemen. Now, that can be taken a couple different ways. That can be in reference to the linemen that Georgia brings in, guys like Bill Morton and Zion Logue and, Tyman Mitchell. And, that can be a reference to them. But sometimes with Kirby Smart, you also get the sense that there may be a little bit of a wink and nod about what might be yet to come. And for a lot of Georgia fans, they hope that when Georgia says it really needs defensive linemen, and I think the DL position overall is one of the positions that probably come up in the comment section of our video programs, maybe more than anything else. When Kirby Smart says we need defensive linemen, that's when we brought so many in. I think a lot of Georgia fans are hoping that maybe Georgia's not done there yet in that regard, and that maybe a transfer player like the former 5-star from Lee County, Georgia, Aubrey Solomon, may be one day in Georgia's plans in the very near future. And it's not just Georgia fans who think that apparently about Solomon. I was also certainly noticing what Malik Herring, another very good Georgia defensive lineman, tweeted out just a couple of days ago when it was first announced that Solomon was going to transfer from Michigan, the place that he signed when the 2017 class. When it was announced that Solomon was planning on transferring from Michigan, that certainly got Malik Herring's attention. Let me show you the tweet from Herring on this, showing a picture on Twitter of Herring standing with Aubrey Solomon saying, Aubrey Solomon, let's do what should have been done, bro. So Malik Herring's mind is right where ours is. It's kind of funny. It's like Malik would really fit in right away here on DawgNation Daily, because the host of this program, the listeners and viewers of this program, when Kirby Smart's talking about defensive linemen, when Aubrey Solomon's on the market, the mindset around here is, oh, can Georgia get Aubrey Solomon? And Malik Herring, as a Georgia defensive lineman himself, says, yeah, you know what? That'd be awful nice to get Aubrey Solomon. Of course, some of you wonder, well, who is this guy? Especially if you're relatively new to following UJ recruiting, the 2017 class can feel like kind of a long time ago. So as a way of kind of setting up where we're going to be for the next couple of days, those other names that could eventually join Georgia on this roster after the early signing day from yesterday, let me go back to 2017 for a moment. Let me let you hear some of what was being said about Solomon then, as for a reason why he's about to get so much attention now. First of all, let me let you hear from Jeff Sintel. As a part of a video series that we did highlighting some of the things about Solomon, one of the things that Jeff told us back then was that this was a wild recruiting ride. There was a lot of speculation as to where he might go back then. It's one of the reasons why Solomon, much like Justin Fields has been, Jaden Hazelwood has been, Demetrius Robertson's been, one of those recruits that some of you accuse us of talking of a little too much. Solomon was that version of that back in 2017, and Jeff kind of explained why there was so much fuss around Solomon way back then, who's now back available on the transfer market now. Here's Jeff Sintel.
It seems like Aubrey Solomon. I mean, raise your hand if you cover a team that he's been a leader for one point of the year. I mean, Aubrey's got his mom is really detailed in his decisions. She sent out that large questionnaire to Michigan. He loved Michigan, then he decommitted because of they got his name, they misspelled his name wrong. They had him at a barbecue cookout that he wasn't there at. That triggered a decommitment. I think the most volatile, crazy, up and down recruit.
So listen, if that was true as he signed as a high school senior in 2017, back on the transfer market once again, maybe some of that same kind of stuff is true once again. But I certainly take Malik Herring at his word when he says this is a guy that ought to come to Georgia. And if he does, I think that Georgia fans are going to feel really good about that if that transfer does indeed happen. And to give you a little bit more context on this, let me also go back to 2017 once again. You just heard Jeff Sintel from way back then a moment ago. How about Chris Kirschner, who at the time was covering Alabama recruiting? And in terms of how Solomon fit into the defensive line picture as a defensive tackle back for that recruiting cycle, Kirschner didn't mince words when he described just how good Aubrey Solomon is, and I would suggest still is now. Here is the former Alabama recruiter Chris Kirschner on Aubrey Solomon from 2017.
In the end, he's worth it. He's probably, in my opinion, I think he's the best defensive tackle I've seen, better than five-star defensive tackle Marvin Wilson. Alabama actually has Aubrey Solomon as their number one defensive tackle. That just shows you how good of a player he is.
So the hype around Aubrey Solomon was worth it then, justified then, and likely justified now. A guy that multiple recruiting experts have called the best available defensive tackle from a signing class just 2 cycles ago is suddenly back on the market again. And I would have guessed that in the next few days, that is going to get a lot of attention around DawgNation as Kirby keeps looking to work and grow and get better with his 85-man roster. But it's not just that defensive line position. You also heard Kirby Smart say a moment ago that Georgia still has some areas of concern it's looking to address. Kirby did go into a little bit more detail about exactly what those areas of improvement and those spots that Georgia was still keying on might be. Here's a little more from Kirby in that regard.
Areas we still got to work on or we fell short on is probably defensive back and receiver and also probably some more offensive linemen or another offensive lineman. So those are things we're trying to add to this class to make it complete. But we're excited about this group and very pleased with it.
So for the most part, people who follow Georgia recruiting closely know those are the positions that Georgia's still chasing in terms of the available players as you head towards the classic old-school national signing day in February. But I do think it's still kind of cool that Kirby Smart gives you his laundry list there. We're looking for a defensive back, we're looking for a wide receiver, and he says at least one offensive lineman. I think that's kind of a cool thing for Kirby Smart that he lays it out as explicitly as the Georgia fan assumes it is in terms of where Georgia's going for this. And most of you are kind of aware of some of those names. Let me give you some quick updates on some of this. First of all, Tyreek Stevenson from down in South Florida. That's the defensive back that I think that Georgia fans want most, along with Kaiir Elam as well. There was a little bit of confusion with Stevenson yesterday, and Jeff Sintel's reporting on this remained steadfast, and ultimately he turned out to be right. But when Stevenson was a part of a tweet about a 9:15 announcement, some folks were watching in on that. Stevenson sat at the table. Not only did he not announce anything, apparently he didn't sign a letter of intent either as a part of that. Stevenson did tweet out a message, though, for those who continue to be curious about where he ends up, as one reporter pointed out that nothing happened with Stevenson Stevenson yesterday. Stevenson says stay tuned, though. January the 5th is a part of the televised high school football all-star game. Stevenson will make his intentions known, and that, you better believe, will be an announcement that Georgia fans are paying very close attention to. I think that Stevenson, despite the fact that he won't be Georgia's highest-rated recruit, when you factor in the additional context of position of need, I think that Stevenson, if he chooses Georgia, may end up being the recruit celebrated the most by Georgia fans because of how much, as Kirby Smart just said, Georgia needs those defensive backs. But those aren't the only positions that Kirby's still chasing. He said that a moment ago. He mentions wide receiver there as well. And we know when we think wide receiver and a player is still on the board, we obviously know the player at that position we've talked about the most here on DawgNation Daily. That's obviously Jaden Hazelwood. At this point in time, I think it's probably appropriate for us to push the pause button on Hazelwood a little bit. Doesn't mean that Georgia can't get him on January the 5th when he makes his announcement, but it's one of those things where I think Dog fans would rather be pleasantly surprised. You know, you've seen a lot from Hazelwood as of late that makes it seem like he's trending away from UGA. Let me give you an example of that from his Twitter feed here recently. Someone was joking with one of those memes you see on the internet a lot about, you know, the Justin Fields issue being the reason why Jaden Hazelwood initially decommitted from UGA. Hazelwood responded to that saying, you know, laughing emoji, saying, you know, that's a good one. I don't fault Hazelwood for having some fun on social media, but this is one of those deals now where the social media story for Hazelwood would seem to be suggest that he's trending in a different direction from UGA. Maybe he shocks us and surprises and indeed does commit to Georgia on January the 5th. That's still a possibility. But as it stands right now, I think that the Georgia fan ought to follow Kirby Smart's lead in a couple of things. Kirby's one of these guys that doesn't burn any bridges in recruiting. You know, Demetrius Robertson chooses Cal. That's fine. We wish you well in the future. And what do you know? Demetrius Robertson kind of gravitates back towards Georgia. Aubrey Solomon chooses Michigan for the class of 2017. That's fine. We wish you well. And here we are in the transfer season. Maybe it's possible that Aubrey Solomon kind of works his way back towards Georgia. There's something to be said for not burning bridges. I would invite Georgia fans to do the same thing when it comes to Jaden Hazelwood. Maybe on January the 5th, Hazelwood will choose somewhere else. That's fine. Let him have his moment in the sun. These things have a way of working out over time. And maybe with Jaden Hazelwood, sooner rather than later, that same thing could be true. One more quick point to bring up here, though, as we kind of go a little bit long off the top of the program. Kirby Smart also mentions offensive line recruiting as something that Georgia still definitely wants to do more of. There's a little bit of an interesting development in that regard if you look at the Twitter feed and the account for Georgia offensive line coach Sam Pittman. His last two follows, now his last three follows include country music superstar Luke Combs, but his last two follows include Reggie Nestor and Cindy Nestor. You can't help but notice that's the same last name as four-star offensive lineman Ohio State commit Doug Nestor, a really good-looking offensive line prospect. So the Nestor family gets a follow from Sam Pittman. Nestor, by the way, does not sign yesterday. He's still out on the board. That's obviously a player still in pursuit, and the expectation is, based on that image from Sam Pittman, that the pit boss is on the case here as Georgia goes out and tries to get another big-time offensive lineman. So with defensive backs and wide receiver and maybe a transfer defensive lineman, maybe an offensive lineman, another flip from Ohio State. Georgia is certainly gearing itself up for the early signing day yesterday on Wednesday to just be the start of another wild ride. So get taped up, get buckled up, whatever you got to do to get ready. There is plenty more talent still yet to come for Georgia here in this 2019 cycle. We look forward to following it all with you. My name is Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Marco's Pizza. What a day it was for us yesterday, and it continues here today. We're glad to have you with us live on video, 10 a.m., DawgNation Facebook, YouTube, Twitter feed, on the radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Rep, and in podcast form, wherever podcasts can be found, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. We're just really glad that you are with us, and we really appreciate Marco's Pizza for making it all possible. And by the way, speaking of Marco's, I know many of you have already done this, but if you haven't, you need to enjoy that tasty two-a-day from Marco's Pizza. What a great everyday value they have. 2 medium, 2 topping pizzas from Marco's for just $6.99 each. It's every store, every day, the Italian way. So say hello, primo, by ordering yours today from Marcos.com. We're going to find out more about the Georgia quarterback flip from Ohio State here coming up in just a couple of moments. But on DawgNation Daily, let me now bring up a couple of pieces of sort of late information that we were following last night. You know, the full lid, so to speak, on the Georgia recruiting story didn't seem to come last night until pretty late. for a while there was a little bit of intrigue and interest in what was going on with Trey Sanders. The 5-star running back, our buddy Michael Carvel, was there in Point St. Joe, Florida yesterday with Sanders when he chose Alabama over Georgia and Florida State. But the letter of intent for Sanders for a long time never arrived at Alabama where it was supposed to, so Alabama could name him as an official signee for that class. Now, I think we were all trying not to get our hopes up on that, and I even said as much on Twitter that it's starting to get a little weird that this hasn't happened yet, but it's still likely to go the direction of Alabama before it's all said and done. Well, sometime around midnight, 1 a.m., that indeed did happen. So if you're waking up this morning and you're looking for the latest on that, the Trey Sanders letter of intent was received by Alabama. They throw up the bat signal of the tweet. Here is the tweet from Alabama on that. Welcome to the family, Trey Sanders. So that's all done and in. Trey Sanders is over with. His letter of intent's been received by Alabama. The honest truth is, I don't know if this was truly as weird as it seems or not. Maybe he was just dragging his feet on sending in the letter of intent. It's not that hard to send an LOIN these days, so it certainly begs the imagination that something wasn't going on here, but we may never find out exactly what that was. There was, though, a late addition to the UGA class. We're going to have more on this later on in our program, but Georgia did add another quarterback, and it's a guy that Georgia fans, for the most part, know pretty well. Stetson Bennett, the former walk-on and celebrated walk-on, as much as you can be one of those. Bennett came back in the fold last night as a Georgia signee. Georgia making this official last night that Stetson Bennett will now become a scholarship quarterback on the Georgia roster. And it's amazing, as fans have, to a certain extent, a little bit of maybe a lukewarm response to this, and at least in some respects. After all, Bennett's not a former, he's not a 4 or 5-star prospect type of thing. He is a former walk-on. It's amazing to see the Georgia players' response to this. I'm going to actually give you an example of that later on in the program, a quote from a Georgia player that saw Bennett in practice last year that you're not going to want to miss. We'll do that a little bit later on. So the hay is in the barn, at least for the beginning of the early signing period for Georgia. As we said a moment ago, there's also plenty more to come for this for Georgia. It's going to be a fun ride here, and I can't wait to be a part of all of that. Before that, though, let me remind you, there are a couple cool things going on at local Atlanta Kroger's over the course of the next couple of days. That if you're still looking to kind of finish off that shopping list, you got a couple opportunities to do this. It's today in Peachtree City. Is the legendary former Georgia coach Vince Dooley will be at the Kroger in Peachtree City signing copies of some of his recent books. It's at 564 Crosstown Drive. That's 564 Crosstown Drive at the Peachtree City Kroger today, from 4 to 6 p.m. You can come out and see Coach Dooley and get one of his book signed. It's Dooley, My 40 Years at Georgia, or The Legion's Fighting Bulldog. You can see Coach Dooley in Peachtree City today and get one of those books signed. I know that's going to be a lot of fun. And then tomorrow, Coach Dooley going to be at the Kroger in Cumming, the beautiful new Kroger Marketplace there at 5550 Bethel View Road. Once again, the address, 5550 Bethel View Road. Also from 4 to 6 p.m., signing copies of his books there. So today in Peachtree City, tomorrow in Cumming, a great chance to meet the legendary former Georgia coach Vince Dooley, get an autographed book, which will make a great holiday gift for that person on your list. All right, we got a lot of stuff we're going to do over the course of our program today, a lot of loose ends to tie up from yesterday's start to the early signing period. Let's learn more now, though, about Dwan Mathis, a guy who knows the landscape of Ohio State recruiting better than anybody else, is Jeremy Birmingham. He's good enough to join us here today on DawgNation Daily, and it's great to have all of you with us as well. All right, we'll get Jeremy coming up here in just a moment on the phone. We'll talk to him about some the stuff with Dwan Mathis. And in particular, you may have read the piece yesterday at DawgNation.com. I thought that Mike Griffith's article and conversation with Mathis' father was fascinating. And in that article, Mathis' dad comes out and really just pledges that the Mathis family is thrilled to be at Georgia, wants to be a part of kind of a team concept, wants to learn from Jake Fromm, wants to really grow in the role as a backup quarterback. And I think that, hearing Mathis, who a lot of Georgia fans maybe didn't know a ton about before the last 24 hours or so, hearing that response from the Mathis family yesterday, I think was a really interesting thing to see. So good stuff there. Let's learn more about him now, though, as we have Jeremy Birmingham here, and good to have you with us here on DawgNation Daily. All right, longtime recruiting reporter, knows the Ohio State landscape very well, knows Dwan Mathis really well, and a couple of these other names that Georgia and Ohio State could be going head-to-head on. It is Jeremy Birmingham from Letterman Row, and a guy that's just been around for a long time. Jeremy, welcome back to DawgNation Daily. We appreciate your time. Thanks for being a part of the program. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm well, thank you. I'm glad to be a part of it. Obviously, a busy couple days down there and up here, so anytime that you get to just take a deep breath and unwind, I'm more than happy to do it.
Yeah, no doubt about that. And I guess, Jeremy, for a lot of Georgia fans, they have played catch-up quickly on a name that you've known about for a while. That's the four-star quarterback, Dwan Mathis, that did flip from Ohio State to Georgia yesterday. Mathis also a former, Michigan State commit and Iowa State commit there as well. You followed Mathis now for a while. For Georgia fans who want to know more about what they're getting in the four-star QB here, what can you tell us?
Yeah, Dwan is a good quarterback prospect. He's really big, 6'5", 200 pounds, throws the ball well. He's kind of got a long delivery. That's something Georgia will work on when he gets there. But he's a talented kid, can throw the ball a long way, and he can run. He's not a 4.5 guy, but he's in the 4.7, 4.8 range, and at that size, it has that sort of deceptive speed with really long strides if he has to get out of the pocket. Obviously, that's not something Georgia does a lot of or wants to do a lot of, but he's a really good athlete and a player that will need some seasoning, but he's a guy that Ohio State first identified in the summer of 2017, and they evaluated him for close to a year before offering, and when they did, he flipped from Michigan State, and the decision to make the switch to Georgia, I think, was based more on the inability to get into Ohio State in early enrollment, which is what he had been planning on doing, and the opportunity pops up with Georgia, and that's obviously a pretty good program to get into and be a part of right now. So it's a tough loss for Ohio State, but it's certainly a good win for Georgia.
So that was actually some of your reporting yesterday online that got my attention when it comes to Dwan Mathis. And I want to make sure I'm paraphrasing your reporting on this, and I'll give you a chance to correct me if I'm wrong. But Ohio State did not feel like they were going to be able to get Dwan Mathis in as an early enrollee. I think there's a hope around Georgia that will be the case, because I think there's certainly a hope that he'll compete to be the primary backup behind Jake Fromm next season, assuming that Justin Fields does transfer. An early enrollee, as you know, Jeremy, certainly allows that to happen a lot more easily when you get a chance to go through spring practice. Would you mind filling us in a little bit more on why Ohio State, at least from your background knowledge, did not think that Mathis could be an early enrollee, and if that situation might change with him coming down here to Georgia?
Yeah, I've heard it from a couple different spots that it was more about a few academic hurdles that still needed to be cleared before he could do that at Ohio State. I'm not sure if there's a different, enrollment requirement or what there is down there, but I don't think that Dwan would have made that decision unless he felt confident that Georgia was going to be able to make it work. So, Ohio State obviously was planning on him enrolling. They let him know, I think, about a week ago that it was not going to be happening, and that obviously is when the wheels started turning and he started to look for other options.
Let me do a couple more things on Mathis, and then there's a couple of other players I want to ask you about, given some Georgia-Ohio State overlap here. You mentioned the fact that Mathis is a quarterback that can run, and it's kind of funny to hear how a prospect like this is described when really all a lot of Georgia fans have been able to do is read about him on the internet. The 24/7 Sports Composite lists him as a pro-style quarterback. I've heard some recruiting experts call him a dual-threat quarterback. How would you if you only have one of two boxes to put him in, is he more of a pro-style passer, or is he more of a dual-threat quarterback in your mind?
In my mind right now, Brandon, it's almost 2019, and every quarterback is a dual threat.
Yeah.
Jake Fromm can run. You know what I mean? Like, if he needs to get out of the pocket, he can move. These are all great athletes. They're all kids. There's nobody running a 5.5 40 out there anymore. So, at a place like Georgia or Ohio State, so we're talking about good athletes. And like I said, with a guy like Dwan, you're talking about a kid who's almost 6'5", 6'6". So if he's in that 4.8 range, he can move just fine. To me, he's a dual-threat quarterback, and I say that only in the traditional sense that when I think of a pocket passer, I'm thinking of Dan Marino, you know what I mean?
Sure.
Or Tom Brady,
Sure.
And he's not that. He's certainly not that.
There was a very interesting quote from Mathis's father at DawgNation yesterday about kind of wanting to come in and fit in. I think the phrase was not cause any problems, not basically rock the boat there. It certainly seems like the Mathis family here kind of eager to be a part of a team concept, and I imagine at Ohio State was going to be the same way. That this seems like a pretty easy family to gel with, at least based on the quotes that we saw at DawgNation yesterday. Has that kind of been your experience as well?
Yeah, it's a good family. It's a solid group. He comes from a great high school with a really solid high school coach in Greg Carter, and He's a player that obviously is connected to a major 2020 target for Georgia as well, and Justin Rogers, the five-star offensive lineman. So that's something to watch for, is how it plays out down the road. Dwan is a great kid, and it's certainly a good opportunity for him.
So let's talk about Justin Rogers for a minute, because obviously we got the attention. What got our attention when Mathis committed was the fact that it was Justin Rogers whose video is the one that went viral. As you mentioned, Rogers is like one of the top 15 players in the country for 2020 in offensive lineman. He's from the state of Michigan, the same high school that Mathis goes to. At one point in time, maybe Rogers was thought to be an Ohio State lean. I think there's some Georgia fans who hope he's now maybe a UGA lean. The video yesterday would certainly pay some credence to that. From the other side of this, more connected to the Columbus side of this, how do Ohio State fans view the situation with Justin Rogers right now? Do they still feel they are the point spread favorite for him when ultimately he makes his decision and goes public?
No, I think most people assume it's going to be Georgia at this point. Rogers is not a kid that really hides his intentions very well. He's been very fond of Georgia since he made his first visit there. He's been there a handful of times. He's also a kid, though, who's notorious for wanting to play the recruiting game a little bit. So I would expect that you'll see the tide change there a couple times in the next few months. But Georgia's in a great position, and I think honestly that I would be paying close attention to Michigan still in that race, because they were out of it early with recruiting him, but he's been there a handful of times in the last couple months, and I think that's a program that's probably ahead of Ohio State at this point. The Buckeyes have sort of backed off there.
What's interesting about that, Jeremy, is Georgia is very deep with interior offensive linemen right now. Really needs tackles, I think, and needs an elite one probably for sure. But, they just got Clay Webb. Obviously, with what happened in the 2018 cycle, bringing in, a guy like Jamari Salyer, Trey Hill, who's an interior offensive lineman. Ultimately, Cade Mays may be more of a guard than a tackle. I guess that sort of remains to be seen. So, given how deep Georgia is with guards and centers, how do you think that Justin Rogers, if you had to project, how do you think he, kind of compares there in that regard? As a player, what kind of profile would you have of Rogers at this point?
Well, Justin is definitely an interior guy. He's only in that 6'2", 6'3" range, so definitely doesn't have the long arms and long body type you want out of an offensive tackle. But he's a really aggressive. I'm talking aggressive. He plays very angry. He also plays defensive tackle and running back for his team. He's a really special player. But definitely, as you project him to college, it is totally an interior guy, maybe even a center, if it comes down to it. But he's a special player, and he plays with a really high motor, and that's what has college coaches loving him.
All right, before we let you go in just a moment, I do want to ask you about Justin Fields, because there's obviously a lot of reports coming out of Columbus on him. Let me squeeze in one more offensive lineman before we get there, and that's actually a name that we talked about before you joined us today, and that's Doug Nestor. And we were showing on our screen that the last two follows from Georgia offensive line coach Sam Pittman on Twitter are for Reggie and Cindy Nestor. Obviously, Pittman is trying to get in with the Nestor family here. That's one of those names that for Georgia and Ohio State and a lot of other programs will be talked about a lot heading towards the February signing day. What do you make of the situation with Nestor right now? Is this a recruiting battle that you think that Georgia can win? And if so, tell us a little bit more about Nestor, if you don't mind.
Well, I think it's been proven that Sam Pittman can pretty much win any recruiting battle he wants to at this point. So I wouldn't put him in a trail position. I know Ohio State is obviously hopeful to hold on to Nestor, he was their first commitment in the class of 2017, committed back in 2019, committed in August of 2017, and he's a guy that is not sure what he's going to do because he doesn't know who his position coach is going to be. There's a lot of rumbling in Columbus that the Buckeyes will replace their offensive line coach, Greg Seguara, and so that's what prompted Doug to back off his plans to enroll early and sign this week. So I think that Georgia as a whole is probably in fourth right now behind Ohio State, Penn State, and Virginia Tech, because I think Nestor's preference is to stay closer to home. But again, it's Georgia, and they've proven in the last few years that there's not really anybody that's outside of their reach. And what Doug is, despite his size, he has that prototypical tackle size at 6'6", 310 pounds, but he's a much more comfortable player inside as well. So that's an interesting dynamic, I guess, when you look at what he can be. He was actually, in his early part of his recruitment, ranked as a top 5 or 6 offensive tackle prospect, but then in the last handful of months has been moved to a guard prospect, and he was first ranked at number 2 guard in the country, and now he's down to number 5. He was named West Virginia's Offensive Lineman of the Year over Darnell Wright, the 5-star offensive tackle who's likely headed to Tennessee. So he's obviously a really good player. Kind of a quiet kid, kind of private, and he'll definitely take a look. And Ohio State got their official visit from him on December 7th weekend, and then he's supposed to take officials to Virginia Tech and Penn State and Georgia in January. So the Buckeyes are just trying to hold on for dear life and hope that they have a plan in place for his position coach soon thereafter.
Let me finish up with this, if you don't mind, Jeremy. Obviously you followed the saga of Justin Fields. He's in the transfer portal now. He's certainly looking around. It seems likely he'll be leaving the University of Georgia. And, the Toledo Blade report comes out so quickly that Fields is, thought to be connected to Ohio State. The Buckeyes are the front runner, I think the word they use for field services there. It left to my own devices, and if I had to rank my likely landing spots for Fields, I would have probably had Ohio State on the list. I don't know that I would have had them top on the list. Why do you think that the Ohio State Fields connection has grown so quickly from almost the very get-go of Fields and the transfer rumor being confirmed? It's like Ohio State's the very first school you hear about right out of the blocks there. How did all of this come about as quickly as it has?
Well, I heard initially Ohio State and Oklahoma are the primary two involved there, and you can understand why both those schools would be looked at. They're two of the 4 or 5 best programs in the country, and with exciting young quarterback-friendly coaches in Ryan Day and Lincoln Riley. And Ohio State has a little bit of an edge, I think, because of Quincy Avery, who is Justin's quarterback coach, who was also Dwayne Haskins' quarterback coach. And plus, he watched Dwayne Haskins throw for 5,000 yards and 50 touchdowns this year in his first year as a starter, and he's close with Dwayne. And the Buckeyes return a lot of options at wide receiver and on offense, and for the second best offense in the country. And I think that's exciting and enticing to any quarterback prospect out there, especially knowing that they're not going to have an entrenched starting quarterback next year or for the next 2 years. So I think it makes sense for him to look at Ohio State. I don't know that I necessarily buy into the rumblings that they're the favorite. I would imagine Oklahoma, Florida State, and Ohio State are all going to get a good look. But if this happens with Justin, if he does leave Georgia, it's going to have to happen relatively quick, and I assume he'd want to make a decision by the time the second semester of school starts in the second week of January.
This is obviously total speculation, but you've been to a million camps, so you've evaluated players, going back forever. It's Tate Martell versus a immediately eligible Justin Fields at Ohio State. You think Fields is beating out Martell for that job?
Well, I've told a few people in the last few days when I've discussed Fields, I think he's the best quarterback prospect I've ever seen in person. Period. Doesn't matter. I mean, that's ahead of Trevor Lawrence, who I think would be a very close second. I think that Fields beats out anybody. I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that even if Justin Fields doesn't come to Ohio State, I don't think that it's a foregone conclusion Tate Martell is the starter in Columbus next year. So I think that he may have a much bigger fight with redshirt freshman Matthew Baldwin next year than he's anticipating. So either way, I think wherever Justin Fields heads next season, if he's leaving Georgia, he's going to be the starter.
Jeremy, really good stuff. We appreciate you being here today on DawgNation Daily. And for the folks who want to find out more about Doug Nestor and Justin Rogers and maybe intel on Justin Fields when it becomes available, we'll know you'll have a lot of coverage of that. Where can people find you online, and how can people connect with you more in terms of the recruiting knowledge there?
You can always find me at Twitter at Birm, BIRM, and we're at LettermanRow.com. And we basically talk Buckeye football with a lot of former Buckeye players being involved, breaking down video of games and recruits, and seeing it from the player's point of view. So it's a pretty unique advantage point.
Good stuff, Jeremy. Thanks for your time here today. We really appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Brandon. See you.
Good stuff there from Jeremy Birmingham, Letterman Row, covering the Ohio State recruiting stuff. And interesting there on Justin Fields. Birm, who knows the Ohio State scene pretty well, pumps the brakes on Ohio State necessarily being the front runner. You hear him also mention Oklahoma. I know that some of the stuff that I guess Jaden Hazelwood had said on Instagram, I haven't really seen that. I don't really know, but I know that some people were telling me that may that sound like maybe Fields is also considering Oklahoma. I don't know what to make about that. one way or another. He also mentions Florida State. I know that DeAndre Francois, there are rumors out there, and I think at this point in time they are just rumors. Rumors out there that Francois anticipates being a graduate transfer, which means a school that we know that Fields considered. They may have a quarterback job open. The problem is they don't have much else at Florida State. So, I mean, you almost run out of landing spots for Fields just given the fact that the schools that he at one point in time considered are, for the most part, kind of a mess right now. So we will see where this goes, including the idea that I guess maybe Fields may just change his mind at some point and decide to stay at UGA. Obviously, that's what Kirby Smart said yesterday, that he hopes that happen. Hopefully, at a certain point, cooler heads will prevail around this entire deal here. At this point in time, I'm more interested in seeing the players that want to be at Georgia play in the Sugar Bowl, and I hope that includes Justin Fields, and seeing which players join this signing class the rest of the way. But as there's Fields news to talk about, we will certainly talk about it. And, of course, it's always great to have you here on DawgNation Daily.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
All right, pretty fascinating stuff with Jeremy Birmingham there, the Ohio State recruiting expert, who, as we start sort of pivoting forward to the other names that could be joining Georgia here pretty soon, that was a pretty optimistic appraisal of Georgia's chances from an Ohio State guy about Doug Nestor. We heard Kirby Smart off the top of the program say Georgia's still looking for an offensive lineman. It sounds like Birmingham's got great respect that Sam Pittman could step in there, and even in a competitive battle where Nestor may want to stay close to home, it sounds like Birm thinks a chance that Pittman's got a chance to win that battle. And also, when you look ahead, Birm reading a lot into that video we saw yesterday and showed a million times of Justin Rogers celebrating with Dwan Mathis when Mathis made his UGA announcement. It seems like right there from that video that you're seeing, if you're watching on video right now, it seems like that does truly give off the indication that Rogers is a strong Georgian lean right now. So that could be a pretty fun one and a pretty interesting one to watch as well. All right, let me mention something kind of cool. One of the things we talk about a lot on our program is when people within our kind of DawgNation family here do cool things, good things. We like to celebrate that from time to time. Well, UGA grad Jeffrey Head's written a novel, and I think this sounds like a really fascinating novel, especially if you've got someone that you're still trying to buy for on your holiday shopping list. How about a really fun book based in Atlanta by a UGA grad Jeffrey Head? The book is called Unholy Intentions. Now, it's it's kind of like one of those sort of mysterious books about terrorists and the FBI trying to battle against those terrorists, and it kind of all takes place right here in Atlanta. And for me, that sounds really, really fun. It's like one of those great, just kind of suspenseful type deals here. I mean, who wouldn't like kind of, anti-terrorist forces battling against the bad guys right here in the city of Atlanta? Well, that's what Unholy Intentions is all about. And it's available on iBooks and at Nookbook at Barnes & Noble. So get that. Support a UGA grad, Jeffrey Head, who's written a great novel. That's a great way for you to get involved there. Unholy Intentions. What a fun book that is to read over this holiday season when maybe you're sitting at home, fire in the fireplace, a little beverage there on the table next to you, and enjoy Unholy Intentions by Jeffrey Head. I think that's really good. All right, SEC through time here. And I want to rattle through some of the other SEC-related recruiting news. I think there's a lot of interesting stuff out there. Let me start with Jimbo Fisher, who Georgia fans have not had a lot of interaction with Texas A&M since A&M has been in the SEC. That may be about to change. First of all, A&M has a great class yesterday. As it stands right now after Wednesday, A&M third in the 24/7 Sports Composite team ranking. Now, the gap between A&M and Georgia is about this wide, but nonetheless, there is the number 3 team in the country, Jimbo Fisher's Texas A&M Aggies, after early signing period. But Jimbo was apparently a little upset at the way that Kirby Smart, at least allegedly, had gone after Zach Calzada. And by allegedly, I mean that if he was recruiting him at all. Certainly there had been some rumors about that. Jimbo Fisher apparently heard those rumors, courtesy of Ben Baby, a reporter who apparently was in the press conference with Jimbo Fisher yesterday. Here's Jimbo's quote. Ben Baby on Twitter says, Jimbo Fisher with some subtle shade about Georgia's late push on A&M quarterback signing Zach Calzada. Here's the quote from Jimbo Fisher. I'm not going to get into it. There were some stories out there. So Jimbo accusing Kirby Smart of something. He's not clear as to what. Don't forget, these two teams will play in November for the first time since A&M has joined the SEC. And I imagine Jimbo Fisher's personality will continue to make that showdown a pretty interesting one. By the way, there was also another Quay Walker hat toss yesterday. Now, I don't know a ton about this recruit. He's from Westover High School down in Albany, Georgia. He chose Missouri, but in the midst of doing this, Jamie Petway is his name. But in the midst of doing this, he stands up. Now, if you're watching a video, you can see this. If you're listening, I apologize. He puts on a Tennessee hat, and then Jamie Petway, the linebacker here, takes the Tennessee hat off, doesn't go full Quay Walker with the throw, gives you a little bit of a side toss, and then puts on the Missouri hat. Now, first of all, Missouri walked the dog with Tennessee all Saturday when they played this year. And now you got Jamie Petway doing this to the Vols again. I beg of the universe, can we please make the Quay Walker hat toss a tradition, or every single year going forward, somebody's going to take the thing off, the Tennessee hat off, and send that spinning into the universe? We got to do this. It was Walker last year. It's Jamie Petway this year, who just became my favorite Missouri player ever, just by the virtue of doing this thing right here. Somebody's got to toss the Tennessee hat next signing day. That's really fun stuff there. Couple other things I want to get to here as a part of our SEC through. One of the names that Georgia fans were watching closely yesterday was the 5-star offensive lineman Evan Neal, the tackle. And that's a true tackle from IMG Academy. On TV yesterday, he did choose Alabama, and what got some attention, kind of went viral, was Neal's dad, seated in Neal's left, did not seem to be happy about this whatsoever, only providing the most casual shoulder pat when Neal chose Alabama. We're obviously used to signing day scenarios where parents aren't always necessarily in agreement about, which schools their kids are going to choose here. Some people were thinking that Neal's dad was maybe showing off the fact that he didn't want Neal to go to Alabama. And obviously for our audience, Georgia fans were hoping that meant that Neal's dad wished he went to Georgia. Neal, by the way, for what it's worth, was also a little bit like Trey Sanders in that his letter of intent took a long time, seemingly an especially long time, to get to Alabama. There was a lot of hope, I think, on Georgia fans' part on that. Neal's mom, though, did tweet back at the Twitter account Busted Coverage, which does a lot of this viral college football type stuff, to kind of explain the scenario. I think we've got Neal's mom's tweet here that I can read for you. What she essentially said was that it wasn't one of those deals where Neal's dad wasn't happy for his son. Here he goes. This is Sheila Neal saying that the whole story is hilarious. She says, "My husband loves Bama. He was camera shy, nervous, and trying to appear cool at the same time." She says it's SpongeBob opposite day, that basically he feels opposite the way that he's being interpreted in the media. I think there's a chance that is true. Look, when you're on TV, when you're not used to being on TV, that's a pretty unusual experience. And I think that, some people might be a little bit more stone-faced about that. I mean, frankly, it wasn't all smiles with Nakobe Dean before he chose Georgia yesterday either, although there was certainly plenty of applause after Dean made the UGA announcement. So sometimes just standing up in a podium like that, on video right now, we're kind of showing you a little bit of nervousness from the Dean camp before he put the jersey on. Now, to Dean's credit and to Dean's family's credit, it turned into smiles and happiness pretty quick. But, there can be a little nervousness here from time to time. Or there's a chance, like a lot of these recruiting battles have been when it comes to Evan Neal, maybe there was something going on behind the scenes, like Trey Sanders and a lot of these other folks. We shall never know. One more SEC story that I want to get to, and then, before we're done, I've got a quote regarding Stetson Bennett you're going to find very interesting. But let me do one more quick SEC story before we get there. Ed Orgeron, like all coaches, did his signing day press conference yesterday. But for whatever reason, the press conference was taking place in the LSU indoor practice facility. And while Orgeron was speaking, some players it wasn't a real practice. They were just, goofing around or something like that. Orgeron was not having it. Here is something that is going to go all over the world, going viral, the way that Ed Orgeron has a tendency to do. Here is Orgeron getting a little upset with some players for interrupting his press conference. A couple of clips kind of mashed together here. Here's Ed Orgeron.
John Emery, another great young man from Destrehan, Louisiana. Hold on a second. Hey, guys. Hey, I'm having a press conference, okay? Thank you. Great young man. On a scrimmage, we wanted to get bigger. I'm stopping. Hey! Stop the ball, stop the drill. I'm having a press conference. Thank you. We had to fix the line of scrimmage, went all the way to Michigan.
My favorite part of it is how he goes right back into press conference talk, coach speak, erudite and sophisticated, like 2 seconds after just berating his players. That's actually pretty funny stuff for Ed Orgeron. And you know what? I got to give credit where credit's due. I have really accused Orgeron of not being a very good recruiter. That's the number 4 class in the country right now. Top 4 classes in the 24/7 Sports Composite team ranking right now are all SEC schools, with Georgia at number 2 behind Alabama, but just ahead of A&M and LSU. So pretty good job there by those SEC West programs. All right, let's also do our MyBookie best bets for here this week. Looking ahead to some of these bowl games coming up over the course of the next couple of days, and these are not SEC games. I'm going to do these for the most part pretty quick here, but I do want to show you some of the MyBookie best bets as we head into a pretty fun bowl week here. First of all, you got South Florida and Marshall. Marshall is only a 3-point underdog in a game that's played like in the shadow of the South Florida campus there at the Gasparilla Bowl. If that be the case, then UCF must not be very good. Give me the Thundering Herd plus the 3. I'll also take the underdog here with Memphis and Wake Forest. The Demon Deacons getting 3.5 here. Wake Forest has walloped a couple teams this year. They beat Duke very bad early in the season. I will take Wake Forest as a 3.5-point underdog. Army minus the 5 against Houston. Houston's got a million coaches going all over the place. Army's pretty good this year. I'll take Army as a 5-point favorite there. They'll win that game by at least a touchdown. Boston College, Boise State's actually a pretty good game. Boise State's a 2.5-point favorite. Something tells me that the underdog may be the way to go there on that. Georgia Tech's a 5.5-point favorite in Detroit against Minnesota for Paul Johnson's last game. I got to take the Golden Gophers there. And then it's Cal versus TCU. TCU's a 1-point underdog. I have no idea. I'll go with Cal on that. That's my bookie best bets. By the way, speaking of my bookie, if you want to get some action in the bowl season, there's a very good chance you know more about that than what I just showed. If you do, one of the great ways for you to show that is by getting some action down right now. And with my bookie, the good news is you can be a winner before the action even starts, because when you use the promo code DawgNation at MyBookie, your first deposit can be matched up to 50%. But you got to go right now. Find MyBookie online. That's MyBookie. Find MyBookie online, and then use the promo code DawgNation. Your first deposit can be matched up to 50%. Get the bowl action down. Listen, last night, a fun game in the Frisco Bowl with San Diego State, Ohio. How about Frank Solich's Bobcats, the other Athens, Ohio? That would have been a fun game to have some action on. So if you've never signed up for MyBookie, now's the time to do it. Use the promo code DawgNation, and your first deposit can be matched up to 50%. All right, we are going a little long here, so let me try to do this kind of quickly. But I did want to give some credit where credit's due. You know, one of the things that you saw on social media a lot over the last 12 hours or so, once it was announced that Stetson Bennett was joining Georgia's signing class, one of the things that you saw was this huge level of support by Georgia players for Bennett. And it's kind of weird because for the average Georgia fan, I don't know that Bennett's signature on a letter of intent last night would have necessarily gotten all that attention. I don't know that it would have. And yet you saw this huge celebration from Georgia players. So we reached out to our buddy Cameron Nislek. If you listen to us on the Northside Hospital postgame show after Georgia games this season, Cam's a great, mind for football. Cam's also getting ready to get started with his football league as well. He's going to be a kicker in this new spring league that's getting ready to get going. So he had practice today. He wasn't able to join us on the phone, but he did want us to know why it is that Georgia players like Stetson Bennett so much. So let me give you from Cameron Nislek what he wanted DawgNation to know about Stetson Bennett. Here's a couple quotes here from Cameron when it comes to that. He says, Stetson is an all-around great guy, very funny and cares about his teammates. He has all the talent, and if he was 2 inches taller, he'd be starting at just about any school in the country. We had one of the top defenses in the country last year, Cameron said, and Stetson was able to carve them up better than any quarterback we played, basically imitating different offenses every week as the scout team quarterback. Cameron goes on to say, I'm glad he was able to get the game experience at the junior college level, and I expect him to be a great asset for the Bulldogs. That's Cameron Nislek, the former Georgia punter, who was at those practices last year when Stetson Bennett was making such a name for himself, and that's one of the reasons why so many of the other Georgia players are so excited about having him in the fold here as a scholarship quarterback for 2019. So that's kind of the perspective from behind the scenes for why the Georgia players are as happy for Bennett as they are. All right, and with that said, speaking of being happy, How about the fact that it's been 782 days since those lousy, stinking Gators have had anything to celebrate and enjoy when it comes to the world's largest outdoor cocktail party rivalry against UGA. That's how long it's been since Florida's beaten Georgia. And by the way, based on the early results here from early signing day, that number may keep climbing and climbing and climbing and climbing. I'd like to congratulate Florida for getting 3 players from the same high school. That seems to be a big deal down in Gainesville. While meanwhile, Georgia's going to get the best player in the history of the state of Rhode Island, top player in this state, top player in that state, 5-star, 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 4-star, 4-star, 4-star. But Florida's apparently doing some one-stop shopping at one high school. So good luck with that, with the Lakeland 3. But Georgia's going to still keep stacking its roster and beating up on the Gators in Jacksonville. By the way, thanks for being with us here today on DawgNation Daily. We will see you tomorrow and have plenty more on this recruiting action. Talk to you then. And on video, we will get ready to take some comments. I will apologize to my buddy Connor Riley, who helps us get our radio show together, for being extraordinarily long with the third segment. Hopefully that won't be too hard to clean up here, but we'll get that straightened up, and we'll get some of your comments here on both Facebook and YouTube. Let me start on the Facebook side of things. I'd love to give you a chance to react to anything you want to from the day yesterday and kind of anything else that's out there. So we'll do a lot of that with you right now. Thought some of the Justin Fields stuff was kind of interesting, and I thought what Cameron Nislake had to say about Stetson Bennett was very interesting as kind of a reaction for why so many of the Georgia players were excited as they were about all of that. Wayne Folan, who is our buddy that watches the show from up in Pennsylvania, says that he was sad to see that Penn State got Noah Cain. So that leads to an interesting question. And, this is one of those things that in a portion of our broadcast time like this, we can kind of expand on some of these thoughts a little bit. And what I'm going to tell you is that putting all of Georgia's eggs in the Trey Sanders basket, I do truly believe was worth the risk. The problem with risks are that sometimes they don't work out, right? When you throw the ball deep down the field, there's a chance it gets intercepted, right? But you still got to take some risks if you want to score some points. I think recruiting kind of works the same way. Scared money doesn't make money. And Georgia stopped showing a lot of love and attention to Noah Cain. Noah Cain's a really good running back. It's like the number 6 back in the country, according to the 24/7 Sports composite team player ranking. If Georgia's not showing him love, plenty of other programs were going to show him love. It was one of those obvious things where if Georgia doesn't prioritize him, he's going to be gone. And he's going to choose a Penn State or choose a Texas. I don't know how serious it ever got with him in Tennessee, but those other two, Longhorns and Nittany Lions, he was going to choose one of those two schools, and that's exactly what happened. And as it turns out, not only does Georgia not get Cain, the guy they chose to prioritize, Trey Sanders, they don't get him. And the running back did they prioritize at the beginning, John Emery Jr., they don't get him either. I guess ultimately, what I really wish is that Georgia would have just prioritized Trey Sanders from the beginning, as opposed to trying to get in on him late, because I think it was going to be easier to win with Sanders than it was ever going to be to win with John Emery Jr. Now, if we watch Emery at the SEC level, and if he's just way better than Sanders, then it'll obviously be understandable why Georgia prioritized him the way that it did. But I'm not going to fault Georgia for giving its lion's share of the attention to the overall better prospect. I think that's the way you build the best roster possible, and sometimes it's not going to work out. Georgia took an L with running back recruiting. Now, all due respect to Kenny McIntosh, but I think they're going to take McIntosh no matter what. So this is not an issue of Kenny McIntosh is not enough. That's not an issue. They were going to take McIntosh and maybe another back as well, and they ultimately don't get that elite back that they wanted. They took the L for this recruiting cycle at that, but I think that's only going to energize the program to go after, an Evans or a Kendall Milton or somebody like that for the 2020 cycle. I think you're going to start hearing about that kind of stuff really, really quickly, because I think that Georgia now knows that it really needs that priority, that elite, top shelf, 5-star level, top 2 or 3 back in the country. It really needs that for the 2020 cycle. My guess is that Georgia will answer that pretty emphatically.
One thing on Sanders.
Yes.
Connor Riley here.
Yeah, Connor Riley.
If I may interject.
Please.
Are we sure that's a guy that we want at Georgia?
Are you talking about because of the Heisman Trophy stuff yesterday?
So, well, first, this is more a personal thing. He shows up to his press conference, and I know you say it's a Sinbad sweater or whatever. He shows up wearing a Cosby-looking sweater in 2018. Not a great look. Moving on. Sure. He said he's going to win the Heisman Trophy as a freshman in Alabama.
I don't like that.
That's wild. For one, Tua's probably going to win it. if it's an Alabama player. 2 years ago, Alabama signed Najee Harris.
Right.
Arguably, I have to go double check the recruiting rankings. It's like him and Leonard Fournette all-time highest ranked running backs. Harris can barely get on the field.
Right.
And now I know Damian Harris can go in the NFL next year, but they're still going to bring Josh Jacobs back.
Sure. So, obviously, with all due respect, Trey Sanders is delusional if he thinks he's winning the Heisman Trophy next season, and I'd certainly prefer he not say that. But that's the kind of thing that both Alabama or Georgia is going to coach out of him in 5 seconds. So it's like, what he says as a high school senior, there's not a ton I can do about that. And if you're Alabama now, that's Alabama's problem. That's not a great quote. The fact that the last I checked, that's his pinned tweet at the moment is his pinned tweet is the fact that he plans on winning the Heisman next season. It's not a great look. It's not. But listen, Del McGee would have coached that out of him in 5 minutes, and I'm sure the Alabama staff will kind of do the same thing. Charles Felder says, BA, in your opinion, who are some of the top remaining recruits out there a must get to close out this class? So, Charles, we talked about that off the top of the program. For me, it's a transfer defensive lineman like Aubrey Solomon. That'll be as celebrated from me as anything that Georgia will do for this entirety of this offseason. If it can bring in Aubrey Solomon, it has won a big-time battle by being able to do that, and it's made itself a lot better. I think Solomon's an elite talent. Tyreek Stevenson's another name for me on that. I think that Georgia really needs to upgrade its defensive backfield given the fact that DeAndre Baker is about to depart the program. Stevenson becomes really important. I think Stevenson's a little bit more of a likely Georgia attraction than Kyer Elam would be, but Elam's up there for me on that. I found what Jeremy Birmingham said about Doug Nestor to be interesting. That's one of the reasons why we want to have Birm on today, because there were several instances where Georgia and Ohio State stuff kind of overlapped a little bit, and Nestor's an example of that. I really want to see Georgia get a tackle, and I can't quite tell if Doug Nestor can play tackle or not. You hear Jeremy say he sort of has the build of a guy that might play tackle, and yet he's probably more of a guard. I just don't know that Georgia's going to be able to get Darnell Wright. I think that it was – now, listen, you say, well, you don't put anything past Sam Pittman. I don't put anything past Sam Pittman. I really don't. But I do think it was a little bit telling that Georgia had a chance to host Darnell Wright this past weekend, and once again, Darnell Wright, canceled another scheduled Georgia visit. In this case, goes and takes another visit to Tennessee. Now, Wright was never going to sign before February. I don't think Georgia could have changed his mind in that regard this past weekend. I really don't. But, ask Jeff Sintel sometime about the chronicled number of canceled visits for Wright to UGA. To me, that starts to add up. It's almost like we say follow the visit. Sometimes you have to follow the lack of visits. As the country song says, if the phone doesn't ring, it's me. In this case, the phone ain't ringing from Darnell Wright. We should probably read something into that. But I'd feel much better about Nestor as a replacement for the spot that could have gone to Darnell Wright if we thought that Nestor could play tackle. It sounds like Jeremy Birmingham, who knows these players from that part of the world really well. It sounds like he's got some suspicions about that. Hugh Nash says Trey Sanders loves himself some Trey Sanders. And this is one of those things where, if Trey Sanders had signed with Georgia yesterday and said, I'm going to win the Heisman Trophy my first year, I do think Georgia fans would have laughed it off. It would be just as ridiculous. Saying that you're going to step onto the Georgia campus and win the Heisman Trophy in your first season would have been just as ridiculous as saying the same thing about Alabama, given Georgia's running back depth and given Georgia's overall offensive profile right now, which is pretty loaded. That'd be just as ridiculous. But the response, I think, for most of us would have been, ha, 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 these kids these days. And then we would have just been glad to have Trey Sanders in the class. When Sanders says that about going to Alabama, it somehow seems a little more sinister or just, more delusional or, frankly, even something maybe even more negative than that. But ultimately, honestly, you can't fault these guys for having, a lot of confidence in their talent. I really don't think that you can. But I do understand where people are kind of coming from on that. Some of y'all are describing the sweater that Trey Sanders was wearing yesterday. Some of y'all seem to like that. John Anthony says Solomon would be huge, literally. Yeah, John, he really would be. And maybe I'm wrong about this, but, right out of the block yesterday, Kirby Smart's talking about needing defensive linemen, and you may have noticed how much we need defensive linemen. I can't help but want to do a wink, wink, nod, nod when Kirby says that, or at least assume that. I can't help but think that way. John McMillan also mentions Tyreek Stevenson. Yeah, that January 5th deal for Stevenson is going to be massive. And, listen, the name I'm obviously not talking about here is Jaden Hazelwood. I think that with y'all's permission, I'm just going to give the Hazelwood stuff a rest for a little bit. I think I'm going to give that a rest. If he chooses Georgia, that's great. If he chooses Oklahoma when he transfers 18 months later, maybe Georgia can get him back in the fold here, because I've said this a million times, and I want to be quoted on this. I want you to write this down. These kids from Georgia that go a million miles from home, west of the Mississippi, north of the Mason-Dixon line, ain't none of them ever happy. Ain't none of them ever happy, and the bad grammar is intentional in that regard. So all due respect to Jaden Hazelwood, if he thinks that Oklahoma's the place for him, then go there, try it for a year, and when you transfer, hopefully Kirby Smart doesn't burn any bridges and gets back involved, because I do think Hazelwood's a good player. Extra attention that turns some of y'all off aside, I do think Hazelwood's a good player. So if he changes his mind and comes to Georgia on January the 5th, I'll take it as a pleasant surprise. When he goes to Oklahoma, decides he doesn't like it, and transfers out, my hope is that Georgia stays involved.
We're pivoting to Dominic Blaylock. This is a Dominic Blaylock podcast.
I'm
now.
on to Cincinnati.
We're on to Dominic Blaylock now.
Exactly.
Guy who wants to be – guy who called in to DawgNation Daily
That's right.
yesterday.
I've been trying to tell y'all that Dominic was the guy. I've been trying to tell you that Dominic Blaylock was the guy all along. No, but listen, we've always liked Dominic Blaylock, and you need to check in our interview with him yesterday. It's really good stuff. And listen, Dominic said with his own mouth, I still want to get Jaden Hazelwood, so I still feel the same way. But as it stands right now, I'm probably going to put a little air in between us and talking 100 times over and over about Jaden Hazelwood. We'll take him when he transfers, because if he goes to Oklahoma, that's eventually what's going to happen.
One quick thing on him going to Oklahoma. Obviously, a lot of people are connecting that there.
Yeah.
Just pay attention to Lincoln Riley, to the NFL rumors. Those things are going to be very persistent. A lot of teams are going to want him. He's got Cleveland has a head coaching opening. Baker Mayfield might want to work with him again. Aaron Rodgers in Green Bay, they have an opening. Green Bay might want to go after him. There are going to be a couple of different places that open up, and we've seen the NFL, sort of like college football is as well. It's an offensive-driven league. Sean Payton, Sean McVay. The New England Patriots, sure, Belichick's a defensive guy, but they're led by Tom Brady, and they've been as great as they are by Tom Brady. The Chiefs this year. Andy Reid, Patrick Mahomes. Offense drives that league. I think an NFL team would be kind of really smart to go hire Lincoln Riley, and that is going to throw a lot of plans for potentially Jaden Hazelwood in Oklahoma into flux.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting point to bring up, and K9 Blues agrees with you in the YouTube comment section on that. Clint Turner in our Facebook comment section also asked, BA, which of these quarterbacks that Georgia's about to bring in are you most looking forward to seeing play? For me, it is going to be Dwan Mathis, and I'll tell you why. And that's no disrespect to Hudson. Good Lord. Stetson Bennett. That's no disrespect to Stetson Bennett, who Georgia players, Cameron Isaac included, are just thrilled about. And it's no disrespect to John Rice Plumlee, who we hope to hear some good news on coming up very soon. For me, it's Dwan Mathis, because I am fascinated by this combination of tall guy who can run. I mean, I feel like that when I think about quarterbacks, I see short guys who can run and tall guys who stand there like statues. The idea that you're a guy 6'5", 6'6", you're seeing over the offensive line and you're seeing over defenses, but you can also be mobile and move around a little bit. And Jeremy Birmingham confirmed the fact that, this young man can really move in the backfield, in the pocket. That's a pretty interesting profile. Now, I also thought it was interesting that Jeremy Birmingham, and I have kind of seen this on the film that we've shown over and over again, that he does kind of have that real long, almost like a baseball pitcher release. Trevor Lawrence flicks it like that. Jacob Eason's got the really easy, effortless arm motion. That's what. If you're 6'6" and you run and you're mobile, and you're not a 5-star quarterback, there's going to be a reason. And for Dwan Mathis, that's his reason. He's got, a little bit of a throwing motion deal to work on. Much like a basketball shooter's going to have the catch and quick release when he gets rid of it, quarterback's got to have kind of the same thing. And that's one of those things that James Coley and Jim Chaney will work on with Dwan Mathis. But that's a challenge I believe they embrace eagerly, because the stuff that Mathis does have, as I said, makes him a really interesting prospect. And that competition for the backup quarterback next season could be really interesting.
Can I tell you why I'm all in on John Rice Plumlee?
Uh-huh.
a very easy way to my heart is any athlete doing any rendition of Billy Joel's Piano Man.
Yeah, y'all see this. Jeff Santel tweets this out. Connor Riley tweeted it too. Of Rice Plumlee, who playing the piano, and I got to tell you, if you're a good baseball player, first of all, I sort of sneakily hate John Rice Plumlee because if you're that good at baseball, if you're that good at football, and you also play the piano, I feel like that's too much talent for any one person to have. Now, and also, I had a chance to meet him at a Georgia game this fall. He's like the nicest guy in the world. I mean, you don't talk about a guy that just probably has all doors open for him in life. I'm like so jealous of John Rice Plumlee for being that good at so many different things. That's a lot of talent for one young man to have because that's a legitimate piano playing performance there and a great athlete as
Little
well.
bit of flair too, not strictly by the book. Gave his
Exactly.
own separate rendition of a classic song.
I feel like you got to pick a lane. You can either be good at music or you can be good at sports, but I can't have you being good at both. That's just too much talent for untalented people like me to have to endure.
But what about Sonny Michel?
Sonny Michel's got that as well. He's got the hip hop thing going on. Yeah. Once again, I'm also very jealous of Sonny Michel too because he's also got the the handsome looks and everything else. So yeah, I feel like you can't be good at two things. Or in Rice Plumlee's case, it's three things. I feel like you can't be. That's just too much talent for one guy there. So I don't know about that. You're making me feel self-conscious about myself. Crow King 123 says, I got to see Plumlee play the Piano Man. Yeah, it's great. First of all, I got great respect for 18-year-olds who still have great respect for the classics like Billy Joel. I got great respect for him on that. That's a lot of talent for one person to have, for sure, and another handsome, good-looking guy himself. So, yeah, we'll hop over and get some more Facebook comments and come over here in just a second. Blind Squirrel Sports says about Justin Fields on YouTube. He says, any chance Fields gets an opportunity to also play baseball at his new school, or is he focused solely on football? If it was me, I'd rather hit curveballs than be hit by linebackers. I know we've talked about Fields in baseball a lot. The honest truth is I don't really know how good of a prospect Fields really was at baseball. I don't know. I also don't know. I know Oklahoma's got a baseball team, but, I mean, does every team in the Big Ten have a baseball team?
I'm sure, yeah. Yes,
Okay.
they do.
Okay. So maybe that's something he might think of doing. I honestly don't know how good of a baseball player he really was. Antonio Jones on YouTube says Dwan Mathis will be good for UJ. 6'6" is not bad, and they work on that throwing motion. I agree with you on that. Now, I also think I like baseball, and you see guys get to the major leagues. You see some really funny batting stances in the major leagues, and I think the conventional wisdom is once you get to a certain level of the sport, whatever you swing, however you swing the bat, that's how you swing the bat, and you don't change it too much. I think the same thing in basketball, too, with your overall shooting motion. You may get some of that from Mathis in terms of, okay, you've been playing the quarterback position for a while. Now you're at the college level. How you throw it's how you throw it. So how much of a throwing motion can you change? I honestly don't know about that. But what is right about Dwan Mathis, what is good about Dwan Mathis is far and away better than what's not right about Dwan Mathis. So that's an interesting prospect to kind of build on and work on. There may be a little bit of a, some developmental stuff that has to go on there for the most part, but overall that's pretty interesting. Let me go back over to Facebook here for a moment. Over here on the Facebook side of things, David Leary told me the idea of a transfer defensive back in terms of replacement for DeAndre Baker. I mean, I think in some respects that's kind of the role that DJ Daniel has on this team. If Georgia wasn't in such a need for immediate help at defensive back, and, I just think that a lot of things in football work in concert with each other. The presence of Baker makes everybody's job just a little bit easier, even the cornerback on the other side of the field. So, Baker's loss will be felt at more than just his position. Every defensive back position gets a little harder when there's no DeAndre Baker on the field. And that's partially why Georgia went junior college with a defensive back transfer in DJ Daniel. DJ Daniel's a really impressive athlete. That's a guy that Georgia was in on as a high school senior. But if it wasn't for the outsized importance of Baker on this year's defense, I don't know that Georgia would have been as aggressively pursuing a junior college defense back as it was. So you mentioned another transfer DB. I'll take your word on that, young man. But the kind of so-called more mature body, veteran presence of a guy like Daniel, part of the reason why he is here is because of the fact that Baker was so important is about to not be there anymore.
Yeah, would you like to play a little game?
Please.
So let's, with most of the signing hall in the book now.
Can I pause you on your question for 1 second? Brandon Vernon says, I'm trying to turn Dwan Mathis into a 5-star. That's not true, Brandon. Come on, be fair for a second. I just gave you the full picture on Dwan Mathis. I said I like his height. I love the fact that he can run. A little concerned about that throwing motion. There's a reason why he's not a 5-star. That's exactly what I said. That's not quite fair to say that I'm exaggerating him. I'm also not exaggerating Stetson Bennett either. I do think that Georgia did a nice job of bringing in 2 signal callers yesterday. I do think the fact that Bennett knows the offense is kind of a cool deal here. And the fact that the Georgia players rave about him as much as they do, I can't completely ignore that. But we're going to kind of call it like we see it. There's going to be good and bad for all these quarterbacks. None of them are an upgrade over what Justin Fields would have been, assuming Fields does decide to transfer. I mean, you'll never hear me try to spin this as, well, it's good that Fields is gone. I mean, I'm right there with Kirby Smart. As Kirby said yesterday, we hope he doesn't leave. I hope Justin Fields doesn't leave. But if Justin Fields does leave, I can't be, in missing man formation like they do in the Air Force. I got to go out and replace him. And Dwan Mathis and Stetson Bennett on short notice, I do think that's a pretty good job replacing him. Yes, sir.
All right. So most of the hay's in the barn. 21 signees out of 22 commitments. Plumlee is the only one that is not signed yet, justifiably so. So why don't we go position by position and commenters can weigh into with how they thought.
All right.
Give grades. I know you're not a big school guy, but give grades for how the position groups did yesterday.
That sounds great.
So let's start with quarterback.
All right.
What do you give? What do you got? What would you grade Georgia's signing? How Georgia recruited the quarterback position in 2019?
B-.
B-? Wow. That's low for you. I'm giving him a solid B.
Here's why. And this is no disrespect to Dwan Mathis whatsoever.
You're 5-star.
Right, who I just turned into a 5-star. I don't think that Georgia should have ever given up its pursuit on whatever it viewed as an elite quarterback recruit. And this year's cycle, there just aren't a ton of those.
Ryan Helinski would be like a name that comes to mind.
That's the only one I think of when I think about this, just because that's the one that Georgia kind of was in on. And, South Carolina apparently gave him, the keys to the kingdom. Helinski, on his own dime, went to South Carolina a lot. So maybe that was going to be a hard one for Georgia to really stay in on, just given the fact that Helinski really loved the love that he got from South Carolina. But, I mean, the one thing that Georgia has not done the way that Alabama has done is that Alabama has found a way to sign elite quarterbacks every single year, even when they don't need them. I mean, think about the 5-stars that it's going to be a big deal that a 5-star like Justin Fields is not going to pan out. But think about the 5-stars that Alabama has had that didn't pan out there that we don't ever think about. The kid that transferred to Arizona State, for instance, Blake Barnett, he was a 5-star.
That's South Florida. He's playing in the Gasparilla Bowl.
Yeah, there you go. He's in the Bad Boy Mowers game. So, they've done a good job of stocking those seemingly on paper elite quarterbacks year after year after year. I think that Georgia did a pretty good job working quickly to get what it got, but I would have preferred them somehow stay involved with an elite quarterback over the course of the 2019 cycle. But to reiterate this, I mean, the people who do this for a living will tell you that this year is not like most years in terms of, is there even a 5-star quarterback on the board anywhere?
Oklahoma has the one 5-star quarterback, Spencer Rattler out of Phoenix.
All right.
So
well, there you go.
Moving on, I think this might be the lowest grade we agree on, running back.
Yeah. I'm just going to give it an incomplete because I'm not going to, say anything bad about Kenny McIntosh because McIntosh brings a pretty interesting skill set to the table. But Kenny McIntosh can't be your only running back signee. Georgia took an L with running back recruiting for this recruiting cycle.
I'm not going to duck this one. I'm going to give him a C.
Okay.
Fair enough. Moving on. We're going to lump Rylan Goody in here, pass catchers.
Yeah, that's interesting. As it stands right now, because I like Goody a lot. I really like Blaylock a lot.
Goody, who we also intervied yesterday.
Yeah,
on
exactly.
DawgNation
And y'all got to hear that. Rylan Goody is going to be a senator one day. That's an impressive young man. I love Blaylock. I love Goody. Kirby himself has said they want another wide receiver. So it's a solid B right now. It's not a B plus, and you got another name. But when you look at the other guys that are out there, that's a B, right?
I give it a B plus. Dominic Black, as of right now, he's a 5-star.
Yeah.
That's something Georgia hasn't done since 2009. And Micaiah Tongue is a physical wide receiver. I think a little bit like Jeremiah Holman was coming out, someone who could develop into a very good wide receiver. Goody is another big body tight end, which might kind of be a position of need if, Nada goes on to the NFL and Luke Ford goes elsewhere.
Yeah.
And if Hazelwood decides he wants to come to Georgia, there you have an avenue to bump it up to an A.
By the way, people are also weighing in on this in the comment section. That's kind of fun to see. Brandon Willis gives it a B. I'll read some of these grades. Doug Rayburn also gives it actually, he doesn't give it a grade. He asks a question. Kirby, mentions wide receiver. He can't mention these recruits by name, but he does say wide receiver. Obviously, the name we'll talk about is Jaden Hazelwood. But, Connor, you were on the story yesterday, and I honestly don't know the backstory here enough to say anything, truly intelligent on this. But George Pickens, who we know has visited Georgia, George Pickens did not sign with Auburn yesterday.
George Pickens was the only Auburn commit to not sign yesterday.
And I wanted to go hear Gus Malzahn's press conference. The honest truth is I just didn't have time to. I'm probably also not that eager to hear Gus Malzahn speak. But I did want to hear the Malzahn press conference. He can't mention Pickens by name either, I don't guess. So
because he has not signed yet.
Because he's not signed yet. So I don't really know what he could have said. But is there – I'll ask the question this way. Is there anything other than rumor and speculation as to why George Pickens did not sign with Auburn yesterday?
I think it's just rumor and speculation.
All right, so I'm going to leave that alone then. So I guess that's a name to at least look at when it comes there.
Let's move on to offensive line.
Please, and y'all keep your grades coming in because
Yeah.
I'm enjoying reading these.
Offensive line, I give it a B. You have to now tackles. Xavier Truss and Warren McClendon, their developmental guys, are a few years away, but they did bring in 5-star Clay Webb, and we can't forget about it.
Oh, it's at least a B for me, and I guess it's a debate if it's a B plus or not, but it's at least a B, and it could be an A. At this point in time, a B plus is not available. It's either a solid B or it's an A if you got an elite tackle to go on this. Actually, if Georgia got Darnell Wright, a B turns into an A. If Georgia gets Doug Nestor, a B turns into a B plus.
I agree with that assessment.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on to defensive line / edge rushers. So this is where I would group Nolan Smith and Jermaine Johnson in this. I think you have to give it a flat out A plus. 5-star defensive tackle. Best number one player in the country in Nolan Smith. You get big body guys like Tyman Mitchell, Zion Logue, sort of space eaters like Jordan Davis was, who was a huge asset to Georgia this year. Jermaine Johnson, number one JUCO player in the country, someone who's going to come in and help right away.
Yep.
And potentially Aubrey Solomon. I mean, it's already at an A plus. I don't really. This might be like how you get like a 4.7 GPA with this class, with this defensive line class.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, I absolutely believe that. By the way, some people are saying, including Troy Batten, that the offensive line recruiting should be given an A because of the Clay Webb thing. I understand where you're coming from on that. As far as the defensive line stuff goes, yeah, it's at least an A for me. You call it an A plus. It's at least an A because in addition to all the names that you just mentioned, in the case of Nolan Smith and Jermaine Johnson, nation's number one JUCO player, Nolan Smith, nation's number one prospect overall, both those guys are going to play next year. And so when you look at a specific position of need for Georgia, being better at rushing the passer, or as guys like Bill Conley call the havoc plays, tackles for loss, quarterback pressures, sacks, tipping passes that can turn into turnovers. When you look at that kind of stuff, Nolan and Jermaine ought to be able to contribute to that right away. So in addition to the overall profile of the talent, at least two of those names mentioned are play right away guys or play very early in their college career guys. So that's another reason why that front seven recruiting or defensive line / defensive and outside linebacker recruiting has to be considered at the very least an A level. You got guys playing right away out of that group.
I agree. Moving on to linebacker. I give this an A, but Kirby Smart did have some interesting comments yesterday about this position group. Obviously, Nakobe Dean, number one linebacker in America, huge get for Georgia. Someone we really talked about on here a lot and how important it was for Georgia to land there. Also, you bring in 4-star Ryan Davis, who is coming off an ACL injury. And the most interesting thing I think we got, other than the field stuff out of Kirby's press conference yesterday, was that 4-star signee Tresman Marshall. Kirby Smart made it sound very much like he's going to need shoulder surgery, something Marshall sort of hinted at when Jeff Santel and I caught up with him at the state championship game. But it was very interesting that he hinted that Marshall, someone who may need surgery on his shoulder, which, again, he's, a lot of people like him a lot. He's gotten some Roquan Smith comparisons based on the way he plays, and I think he's certainly more of a Roquan type than Kobe Dean is. But I find that very interesting.
Well, elite ball, that is very interesting, Connor. I'm glad you brought that up. Elite Baller on our YouTube comment section says that he gives the linebacker recruiting an A plus, and I agree with that as well, because even if Tresman's injured and he has some time to develop, This is how you get great. And I mean great, 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 great. You stack a class at one position, and then you stack it again the following year. And that's a hard thing to do. I mean, we're kind of getting into the real nitpicky stuff in terms of how Georgia could have done certain position groups better. But if you want to get that deep into it, it just goes to show you, like loading up at a position one year and then loading up again the next year is just really hard to do. But look at what Georgia has done with its linebacker recruiting. Now, I think last year I considered Adam Anderson to be an outside linebacker. He played it inside this year. I don't know how his profile changes over the course of his career, but he played it inside linebacker this year. So with Anderson, Walker, and Tyndall from last year's class, and now you follow that up with Ryan Davis, Tresman Marshall, who Jeff's intel sources have raved over, how he performed during his senior season. And then as the capper on all of that, Nakobe Dean, snatching him from the clutches of Alabama and Ole Miss, two SEC teams on signing day. That's the easiest A+ to give out of them all for me. I think that Georgia for 2 years in a row has absolutely cleared the board when it comes to linebacker recruiting.
Yep, we talk a lot about how Alabama, they've turned into a linebacker factory, and that's, I think, been a big reason why their defenses have been as good as they have been over the years. I think you're going to continue to see that. Because this year, admittedly, the linebacker play took a huge drop-off without Roquan. They were playing some guys. Tay Crowder had a very good year. Juwan Taylor, Natures Patrick, guys who weren't those high-end superstar recruits. And I think when you start bringing in Walker, Tyndall, Adam Anderson, Nakobe Dean, Ryan Trouble Davis, I think that's going to clear up a lot of issues.
Yeah, by the way, Tywan Taylor said that he likes the grade segment. He thinks we should do this more often. Thanks, Tywan.
Yeah.
Ty Millibrook says that Anderson did not play inside linebacker. He wasn't as an inside linebacker.
Yeah, they moved him around.
Yeah. He was
sort of like
in
this was when I was at Georgia, it was a little befuddling to me at times.
Right.
Sort of like a Leonard Floyd role where he's a queen of the chessboard. He is a good enough athlete to where you can play him at anywhere on the field.
Yeah, I'm not telling you that he played there exclusively, but you can go back and find plenty of instances when Anderson was lined up inside this year.
Mm-hmm. And then to round things out, the secondary. Right now, Lewis Cine and DJ Daniel are the only two in the class.
Yeah.
I'm going to give this the incomplete grade because I want to see if Georgia can land Tyreek Stevenson. I want to see if they can land Kyer Elam. Those are of the recruits, in my opinion, those are the two biggest needs, not counting Aubrey Solomon because he's already a college-enrolled player.
This is one of the probably rare examples with this class where Georgia could really fall out of what you think of as passing grade territory if it doesn't land a Stevenson, if it doesn't land an Elam, answering your need at defensive back where, you maybe have a couple questions at safety and you definitely have a big issue at cornerback. You may even have two issues at cornerback that we'll have to wait and see with the other one. But given what you have going on in secondary right now, if you don't answer emphatically, in January and February with at least one of those big names, Georgia probably hasn't done what it needs to do with its secondary grade. So as it stands right now, you give it an incomplete. I don't know if I'm only allowed, one incomplete. But as it stands right now, here's what I'm going to give it. I'm going to give it a B-, and I'm expecting that grade to go up. And I'll admit the reason why I'm willing to give this a B is because I am heavily influenced by what Lewis Cine put on film this year.
He's a guy who might be able to play
Lewis Cine's playing next year, I really believe.
Maybe at the star position, especially with the news. D'Angelo Gibbs is currently not with the program again.
And boy, I should have maybe mentioned on the regular broadcast today, man, I hate that for D'Angelo so much. Y'all know. Go back and watch D'Angelo from high school. That is a terrific, terrific football player. And frankly, at the time, that was as big a recruiting win as Kirby Smart had ever had at Georgia. When he got Gibbs, a player that Alabama really wanted, that really cemented the fact that Kirby was going to be a great recruiter at Georgia. I had very high hopes for Gibbs. And, whatever's going on with him in the future, man, I hope he gets that figured out and taken care of. But hate to hear that he's not with the team right now, or maybe not with the team ever again, depending on, I guess, how all this goes. Really, our prayers go out to D'Angelo Gibbs to find a home in football and, find certainly a comfortable position in life. But, not seeing Gibbs in the red and black and those silver breeches, that's a real disappointment for me because I loved Gibbs in high school, and I thought that Gibbs was going to be a surefire contributor at Georgia. So I do wish him well in the future.
This is a few weeks ago, we showed you a video here. I believe it was for DN90. A couple of Georgia players, the week of the SEC championship game, they went to the hospital to visit some sick kids. Gibbs, more than anyone, was smiling the whole time, interacting with kids, making sure that those kids and the patients there at Athens Regional were having a great time. I really respected him a lot for that. I thought it was a really cool gesture.
Yeah, classy touch there for sure. All right, so we kind of rattled through all those positions there.
I need your final grade for the class. Number 2 in the country.
I don't know what my average was based on the grades that I just gave, so hopefully this is at least close enough in regards to that. It's a B+ for me.
I think in a vacuum, it's an A- when you compare it to the team that Georgia has to beat, Alabama. I think it's got to be a B+.
That's the thing is like, and I don't mean to be gloom and doom here, but I mean Georgia being way better than 128 other programs doesn't do as much good as you might think, because most of those 128 teams Georgia will never play. And if you look at the 24/7 sports, and I always joke about this, but I mean this for the most part seriously, I'm not great at crunching the numbers and the math of all this, but if you look at the score on the 24/7 sports composite team ranking, that 300 is always kind of that magic number for what an elite class is. If you look at where Georgia is, just below that 300 number right now, but I would say significantly ahead of Texas A&M and LSU. What you say significantly ahead? A&M's got like 10 3-star players in its class. Georgia has, I think, 2 right now.
I looked at the math last night. Alabama is at 312 as of right now. Georgia's at 297. A&M, who's third, is at 283.
Yeah, so I mean,
So and again, number 3 class usually pretty good. Georgia, most years that's a top 2 class, right around that 300. Some years it might be top 3. Alabama, and it's been written about this, depending on who they get to close out, could be statistically like the greatest recruiting class of all time.
Some of y'all think I've graded it too low by only giving it a B+, but Philip Jordan Wells says I was tripping about that. Monty Moon says I got spoiled with the perfect class last year. But, I mean, unfortunately, y'all, Georgia's got to come close to pitching a perfect game here. I mean, if Georgia was going to get to play, Clemson's schedule, then, having Clemson's recruiting class, you realize they've signed like 7 offensive linemen in 3 years. You can get away with that junk in the ACC because you're playing Wake Forest and Duke and teams like that. I mean, I saw Dabo Swinney step up on the podium yesterday and give one of the most asinine speeches I've ever heard about, how high and mighty Clemson recruiting is right now. And they don't take people who don't visit them. And, clearly he's bothered about something. I'll leave it to your own imagination to determine what he might be bothered by. I'm imagining it's got something to do with Jamari Salyer and Clay Webb. But nonetheless, he's bothered by something. But he's over there giving all these speeches, and, Clemson can feel like it's, sort of better than everybody else, playing by a different set of recruiting rules. That is the luxury available to you when you're in the ACC Atlantic. Georgia's got to, deal with a fire-breathing dragon every December. That's the nicest thing I'll ever say about Alabama. I'm sick and tired of them, but y'all know it takes building a major roster, to go head-to-head there. So this is not comparing Georgia to itself, nor is it comparing Georgia to, these, averages, grits, also ran teams right there on the schedule. This is unfortunately comparing Georgia to the behemoth it's got to try to take down here, and that's about as practical as I can speak about this kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. One other thing, Blake Wilson made a good point on the Facebook page. It's always going to be tough for Georgia to have the number 1 class in 2019, just because Alabama has a chance to sign so many more guys. Alabama's at 26 signees and commitments right now. Georgia's at 22. Alabama is still projected to sign 3 or 4 more guys. Georgia can't get that high in this class. The 2020 class is, again, the class where you're going to want to look for Georgia to get back to that number 1 overall seed. And just sort of, final thoughts on this. There was a time yesterday where things weren't looking great for Georgia and Nakobe Dean in terms of where he might go. And you and I were talking about it. I flat out said I was going to write, this was going to be my Good Day UGA headline. Georgia signs number 2 class if they had missed on Dean. Georgia signs number 2 class in the country, and it's the most disappointing number 2 class of all time.
Yeah, that's certainly an interesting a way to say that. Scott McDougald on our Facebook comment section was saying that, a lot of this in terms of the ranking is based on the fact that Alabama, as one of our YouTube commenters also mentioned, Alabama could sign more players than Georgia did. It's not necessarily all rankings based for me. And you got to realize that for 99% of the show, we're talking about how Georgia answered its needs for the most part in a big way with the early signing period. I think it will be interesting to see when you crunch those numbers about, how Georgia does do here. And the one thing that we were also talking about off the air yesterday is when you start looking at the 2 and 3 year profile here of elite players Georgia's brought in over the course of the last 36 months in comparison to some of the other stuff that's out there, Alabama included here. I think that's where things are going to kind of get interesting in terms of the overall grade that you give to this, in terms of how Georgia really is keeping pace with the truly elite recruiting programs that are out there. And I also agree with Gary and Christian Gulasano, who says it's an A if you add a Stevenson and an Elam, and there's no doubt about that these are not static grades. They get closed out.
One thing on 2020, because we've seen some comments, some guys getting mentioned, Tariq Gilbert. Georgia's going to clean. Georgia signed 5 5-star prospects yesterday. Do you want to know how many the entire ACC signed? 3. You want to know how many the entire Big Ten signed?
Yeah.
3.
It's amazing. It's amazing.
Pac-12, I believe, as of right now, only has 1.
It's amazing. And you got guys now, including our buddy Dan Wilkin from USA Today, who are like, oh, it's time to limit scholarships once again.
Yeah,
because there's
Dan Wilkin coming out. I think we should go to 70 scholarships. Just
y'all
have fun with them.
Listen, and this is no shot at any one rider. This is just the thought that's out there in the universe. There are going to be steps taken every single year to reduce the dominance of programs like Georgia and the other SEC teams that are collecting the most talent, and that will always lead to the most wins. I've even seen the comment section today of, the star stuff is overrated. It'd be hard-pressed to find anything in sports more closely connected to recruiting rankings and wins on the field. I mean, it is just a settled science backed up by years and years of data. Collecting talent is the pathway towards winning when you do it year over year over year. And people have never figured out a way to thwart the SEC's run of dominance in regard to this, and they're going to keep tweaking rules, tweaking playoff formats, tweaking everything that's out there to keep this from happening, because people do not like seeing, 87 5-stars show up in Athens, Georgia, or Tuscaloosa, Alabama. They just don't like that.
And to sort of pivot to the 2020 class again, Eric Gilbert, Miles Murphy, both 5-stars, both in the state of Georgia. Both guys Georgia might land. They've already got Broderick Jones, 5-star offensive tackle, committed to the class. Kendall Milton is a name that, so with Georgia missing on Sanders yesterday, I think Kendall Milton is a name that, that sort of helps Georgia because Alabama was also schooling on him. And I do want to give some credit to Matt Rubin. I like this comment here. Dan Wilkin is a saboteur sent by House Bolton. I will point out for all the Game of Thrones fans out there, the House Bolton does not exist anymore. It was snuffed out at the end of Season 6 of Game of Thrones.
Very interesting in both regards. By the way, some of y'all are upset that I did not give the Georgia class a full-on A grade yet. Let me just point out here, there's still some hay left to be put in the barn here. There's still a Solomon brought in as a transfer, which won't count as a 2019 signee, but you know my point. There's still Stevenson. There's still Elam. There's still a wide receiver here. There's still an offensive lineman. I mean, come on, y'all. Look, let's not act like the grade is fully established here for the class.
I'm trying to. Here we go. Ken Feinberg with the comment, the perfect comment to sum up this segment. It's more of midterm grades. These aren't final grades yet.
That's exactly right, Ken. Well said. We certainly appreciate that. Okay, we have got to get ready to go here. Thank you all for being a part of the comments. It's been really fun today. We're going to do more of this tomorrow, and with Jeff with us, we'll look more at the guys that Georgia got. We'll examine a little bit more about what Kirby Smart had to say about that. Let me also say that we got a little bit of a schedule upheaval coming up. So we will do a show tomorrow, and that'll be our last live video show until Thursday. We're going to be off of video for Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. Christmas Eve, Christmas Day. I'm also going to take the 26th off. I'm going to take a day off there. Back with live shows on Thursday and Friday of next week. We'll have a podcast kind of in between, audio-only podcast that you'll be able to check out. But that will be tomorrow will be our last live video show for the next 3 days that we would normally have shows. And then after that, we're going to be in New Orleans getting ready for the Sugar Bowl. So that's going to be a lot of fun. So it's going to be a cool time around Dog Nation. Plenty more recruiting talk tomorrow. Thanks for being with us. DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza. We will talk to you then.